Hello and welcome to Regulation Rangers, making sense of rules that shape our world. I'm your host, Julian Cross.
And I'm Alina Harper.
A policy expert.
Yeah.
It's January 15th, 2025.
And we are diving into
the brand new regulations published just yesterday.
Yeah, so
Get ready for a whirlwind tour as we unpack new rules from agencies like the CFPB, the IRS, the FWS.
all sorts of exciting stuff.
Impacting everything from your wallet to wildlife.
Yeah, it's a veritable buffet of bureaucracy.
Let's dig in.
Okay.
Okay, let's start with the Children and Families Administration, the ACF.
Okay.
Their document titled Strengthening Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. TANF is a safety net and work program withdrawal definitely caught my eye.
That's an interesting one.
What's going on there?
So they're actually hitting the brakes on proposed changes from back in 2023.
Oh, really?
These changes were aimed at bolstering the safety net and streamlining the TNF program.
Right.
But now the ACF is withdrawing them entirely. Yeah, this unexpected move raises some big questions about their current priorities and the future direction of TNF.
It's like they were all set to renovate a house and then suddenly decided to just move out.
Exactly.
Definitely something to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
Now let's shift gears to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB.
Okay.
We've got two regulations here, one proposed and one finalized.
Sounds good.
So the proposed rule, prohibited terms and conditions in agreements for consumer financial products or services regulation, AA, is interesting because it casts a wide net.
Yeah. The CFPB is clearly signaling that they're on the lookout for unfair or abusive practices buried in the fine print of financial agreements.
Makes you wonder what specific terms are making them raise an eyebrow. Could this impact things like arbitration clauses?
Oh, definitely.
Or those pesky hidden fees?
Precisely, this proposed rule could have ripple effects across the entire consumer finance landscape. We'll have to wait and see how the details unfold during the public comment period, but it's safe to say that the CFPB is not letting up on its mission to protect consumers.
And then we have a finalized rule from the CFPB prohibition on creditors and consumer reporting agencies concerning Medical Information Regulation V. This one's a done deal.
Yes, this finalized rule underscores the CFPB's commitment to safeguarding your medical information in financial contexts. Imagine a scenario where a missed medical bill gets unfairly reported to credit agencies, potentially impacting your ability to secure a loan or even rent an apartment. This rule aims to prevent that kind of scenario by putting clear limits on how medical information can be used against you.
It's almost like creating a firewall between your medical history and your financial well-being.
Exactly.
Okay, on to the Energy Department, DOE, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, with their civil monetary penalty inflation adjustments. Sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Well, not quite as simple as it sounds. Yes, FERC is updating the maximum penalties for violating energy regulations to account for inflation, but that's not the whole story. These increased fines send a clear message. Breaking the rules is going to cost you literally. It's a way for FERC to flex its regulatory muscle and emphasize the importance of compliance in the energy sector.
I guess breaking the rules is getting as expensive as everything else these days.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Speaking of costs, let's talk about the Federal Highway Administration, the FHWA, and their Buy America requirements for manufactured products.
Right, so Buy America provisions are all about prioritizing American-made goods in federally funded projects, especially infrastructure.
Think roads, bridges, tunnels, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And this revised rule is likely tweaking the specifics of what qualifies as American-made, potentially impacting everything from sourcing materials to the overall cost of these massive projects.
I see. So it's a balancing act between supporting domestic manufacturing and keeping infrastructure projects within budget.
Yeah, finding that sweet spot.
Now let's dive into the world of wildlife with the Fish and Wildlife Service, FWS.
Okay.
Their proposed rule, endangered and threatened wildlife and plants, designation of critical habitat for 4 distinct population segments of the foothill yellow-legged frog, sounds pretty specific.
It is, and it highlights a crucial aspect of environmental regulations, the protection of biodiversity, even down to the level of a seemingly insignificant frog.
Oh.
By designating critical habitat for these 4 distinct populations of the foothill yellow-legged frog, the FWS is aiming to prevent their extinction and preserve a delicate ecological balance. This could involve restricting development or other activities in these specific areas, potentially leading to pushback from landowners or industries.
It makes you think about the ripple effects of even the most localized environmental regulations.
It really does.
And speaking of ripple effects, FWS has another proposed rule on the table. Endangered and threatened wildlife and plants, threatened status for the Florida manatee, and endangered status for the Antillean manatee.
Right. It's a fascinating contrast. One species gets habitat protection, while two types of manatees are facing potential listing as endangered or threatened. This highlights the complex and often heartbreaking reality of conservation efforts. Declining manatee populations are likely due to a combination of factors, including habitat loss, boat strikes, and pollution. This potential listing could trigger stricter regulations to protect these gentle giants, which could impact coastal development and recreational boating.
All right, buckle up, because we're about to wade into a sea of IRS regulations. The Internal Revenue Service IRS and the Treasury Department trees have been busy. First up, base erosion and anti-abuse tax rules for qualified derivative payments on securities lending transactions.
Don't let the jargon scare you. This proposed rule delves into the world of corporate taxes and international transactions. In essence, the IRS and Treasury are trying to close loopholes that allow large corporations to shift profits overseas and avoid paying their fair share of U.S. taxes.
It's a classic game of cat and mouse between corporations looking to minimize their tax burden and governments trying to ensure a level playing field.
Exactly.
Next up, the IRS and trees have proposed regulations for automatic enrollment requirements under Section 414A.
This one hits close to home for many people. The IRS is clarifying the rules around automatic enrollment in 401ks and similar retirement plans. This could impact how employers design their retirement programs and how easily employees are enrolled, potentially leading to more people saving for retirement, though some employers might see it as added administrative burden.
Hopefully it nudges more folks to prioritize their golden years.
I hope so too.
And then we have a finalized rule from the IRS and trees classification of digital content transactions and cloud transactions.
This is a landmark rule that clarifies how digital content and cloud-based transactions are categorized for tax purposes. Think software downloads, streaming services, data storage, all that good stuff that's become an integral part of our lives. This rule establishes a clear framework for taxing the digital economy, which is essential as we navigate the ever-evolving world of technology and commerce.
So the IRS is essentially catching up to the digital age. Makes sense. Next, microcaptive listed transactions and microcaptive transactions of interest. To be honest, this one sounds a bit niche.
It is, but it's an area the IRS has been cracking down on lately. Microcaptive insurance arrangements, while legitimate in some cases, can be exploited for tax avoidance purposes. These final regulations signal that the IRS is watching closely and they're ready to flag any transactions that raise red flags.
It's a reminder that even obscure corners of the financial world are subject to scrutiny.
Yeah, no hiding from the IRS.
And we have yet another final rule from the IRS and trees guidance under Section 2801 regarding the imposition of tax on certain gifts and bequests from covered expatriates.
This one's all about preventing individuals who've relinquished U.S. citizenship or residency from using gifts or bequests as a clever way to avoid taxes. The IRS is sending a clear message. Even if you've moved on, Uncle Sam might still come knocking.
No escaping the taxman, huh? And finally, from the IRS and trees, certain partnership-related party basis adjustment transactions as transactions of interest. Elena, help us unpack this one.
Well, the key takeaway here is that the IRS is continuing to scrutinize partnership transactions, particularly those involving related parties. These final regulations suggest heightened vigilance against potential tax avoidance schemes, reminding us that even complex partnership structures don't offer a shield from IRS scrutiny.
Moving on from the world of taxes to workplace safety, we have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and the Labor Department, DOL, with their procedures for the handling of retaliation complaints under the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020 AMLA.
These interim final regulations are all about protecting whistleblowers who bravely report potential money laundering activities. By establishing clear procedures for handling retaliation complaints, OSHA and the DOL aim to ensure that those who speak up aren't punished for doing the right thing.
It's about creating a safe space for those on the front lines to expose financial wrongdoing without fear of reprisal.
Exactly.
Now let's switch gears to intellectual property with the Patent and Trademark Office, PTO, and the Commerce Department, DOC, and they're setting and adjusting trademark fees during fiscal year 2025.
This one's a bit of a housekeeping item. The PTO is issuing a correction to a final rule published back in November 2024. While it may seem like a minor detail, these corrections to trademark fees are crucial for businesses and individuals navigating the trademark registration process.
Even small changes can have a big impact, especially when it comes to protecting your brand. Okay, let's talk about Real ID. The Transportation Security Administration, TSA, and the Homeland Security Department, DHS, have a final rule titled minimum standards for driver's licenses and identification cards, acceptable by federal agencies for official purposes, phased approach for card-based enforcement.
Right, as you know, the May 7, 2025 Real ID enforcement deadline is fast approaching. This rule clarifies how federal agencies will implement those requirements after the deadline, aiming for a smooth transition and minimizing disruptions for travelers. It's essentially about making sure everyone is on the same page as we move towards a more secure identification system.
A reminder to check your wallet and make sure your Real ID ready.
Absolutely.
Finally, let's wrap things up with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. CBP, and the Treasury Department, the trees, and their proposed changes to entry of low-value shipments.
This one's all about imports. The proposed changes target regulations for low-value shipments, specifically those under $800. These adjustments could impact how duties and taxes are applied to these goods, which are often purchased online. It's especially relevant in today's world where e-commerce and international shipping are booming.
And that concludes our regulatory roundup for today. Thanks for joining us on Regulation Rangers.
It's been a pleasure.
To explore these regulations in detail, visit www.topiclake.com to stay up to date.
And until next time, stay compliant.